Lee Han hadn't smelled anything in 18 months. The bleach he mopped floors with, the coffee he drank every morning, his own skin after a shower, all of it gone. His pheromone glands went dead the night he lost the baby, and they had stayed dead through every season since. He had accepted it, made peace with the silence, built a life around the absence. Then a man walked into aisle 4 of the grocery store where Lee Han worked, and his entire body caught fire. The scent hit him from 30 feet away. Burnt sugar and cold iron, and underneath, something green and bitter like walnut husk split open with bare hands. It tore through 18 months of nothing like a fist through wet paper. Lee Han's knees buckled, his pricing gun clattered to the tile. A bag of flour slipped from the shelf and split at his feet, but he didn't hear it break, because for the first time since the hospital room where everything ended, his neck gland was pulsing. His own scent, the one that had been dead and buried, was clawing its way back. The man stood frozen at the end of the aisle, tall, wearing hospital scrubs under a dark coat, a shopping basket hanging forgotten from one hand. His nostrils flared. His knuckles went white on the basket handle, and Lee Han ran. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I read every comment. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. 18 months earlier, Lee Han's life had a shape. He worked at the harbor market in North Park, but the job was a means to an end. He was saving for tuition, 3 semesters away from finishing a veterinary technician certification he'd started and dropped when the money ran out. He worked morning shifts, studied in the afternoons at the North Park Library, and kept his life small and organized and pointed toward a future he could see. He was also 5 months pregnant. The pregnancy had been unplanned. Garrett, an alpha he'd been seeing for 8 months, had taken the news with a silence that stretched until Lee Han could hear the answer in it. "This isn't the right time," Garrett had said. He sat on the edge of Lee Han's bed, elbows on knees, looking at the wall. "I just made assistant manager. I can't do this." "So don't. I'll do it. That's not what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean." Garrett transferred $300 before he left. Lee Han opened his banking app and started typing the amount into a return transfer. Got as far as confirming the recipient. Then he looked at the utility bill pinned to his fridge and closed the app. Principal didn't keep the lights on. He told himself it was fine. Manageable. His own mother had raised him alone in Fresno after his father died, working reception at a motel by the coast and still packing handwritten notes in his lunch. If she could do it, he could do it. He was not the first Omega in San Diego to stock shelves with swollen ankles and a growing belly, and he wouldn't be the last. His scent changed with the pregnancy. The black currant deepened, grew richer, and the cold stone note warmed. His co-workers noticed. Manager Reeves, who was usually sharp-tongued and impatient, started assigning him register shifts instead of floor restocking without explanation. Rosa, the part-timer who worked evenings, began covering the heavy lifting, the crate hauling, and the display builds without being asked. It was okay. Barely, but okay. He had the job, the studio, the study schedule. He had a plan. Then at 22 weeks, his body chose differently. It started with cramping on a Thursday. He was scanning a customer's groceries, and the pain folded him forward over the conveyor belt. Rosa found him in the break room 20 minutes later, conscious but gray, and called an ambulance. The emergency room at the university hospital was loud and bright. A resident examined him. An ultrasound tech pressed the transducer against his belly, and the screen showed what Lee Han already knew from the silence where a heartbeat should have been. "I'm sorry," the doctor said. "The pregnancy is no longer viable." The next hours existed in pieces. A procedure, recovery, paperwork. Rosa in the hallway with red eyes and a vending machine coffee. His mother's voice on the phone from Fresno cracking through the speaker. When they discharged him the next morning, Li-Han walked into the hospital parking lot and the world had no smell. The buses, the exhaust, the fried chicken shop across the street, the autumn air, nothing. He pressed his wrist to his nose. Nothing, just skin. His scent had died with the baby. He went back to work after 3 weeks because he had no savings and the rent didn't pause for grief. Manager Reeves didn't ask questions. He put Li-Han on evening shifts where the store was quieter and Li-Han understood the kindness behind it and said nothing. Months passed. The grief flattened from a blade into a weight, something he could carry without collapsing under it as long as he didn't look at it directly. He developed routines. Shift at Harbor Market from 4 to 10. Walk home along the Mission Bay Channel. Dinner for 1. Sleep. Repeat. He dropped the vet tech study plan because the future he'd been building it for had been emptied out, and the structure was still standing, but there was nothing inside it. His heat cycles stopped. The doctor said it was expected. Pheromone shutdown disrupted the whole cascade. An omega without scent occupied a strange, invisible space. Alphas looked through him. Other omegas couldn't read him. He moved through San Diego the way a dropped coin moves through a crowd, noticed by no one, carried by nothing. He told himself he was fine. Every morning, in the bathroom mirror of his studio, he said it out loud before brushing his teeth. I'm fine. The words hit the tile and came back hollow. 18 months. That was the count when a man in hospital scrubs walked into aisle 4 of Harbor Market on a Wednesday evening, and Li-Han's dead body remembered what it meant to be alive. He had run. Left the mess on the floor, left manager Reeves shouting about damaged stock, and clocked out early with his hands shaking. But the man had waited. Li-Han found him in the alley behind the loading dock, leaning against the vending machines, a plastic bag in one hand and an expression that was trying hard to look casual. I'm not following you, the man said. I waited because you went down hard in there, and you're bleeding through that bandage. Li-Han looked at his hand. He was. I'm Neil, anesthesiologist at UC San Diego Medical Center. He paused. Something happened in that store. To both of us. Your scent hit me from across the building. Black currant and cold stone. Then it vanished, like someone switched off a light. Please go away, Li-Han said. Neil pulled out a receipt, wrote a number on the back and set it on top of the vending machine. That's the hospital. You can verify I'm real. He turned and walked away, and his scent faded with each step until the alley smelled like fryer grease and nothing else. Li-Han picked up the receipt, rode the bus home, pressed his fingers to his neck in the dark of his studio. There, faint, his own scent, breathing for the first time in 18 months. He sat on the edge of his bed and cried until his ribs hurt. He didn't call the number. He put it in the drawer beside his bed, under his Social Security card, and the envelope where he kept emergency cash. It stayed. This is Neil, from the alley, the anesthesiologist. Li-Han sat down on his bed. How did you get my number? Your name tag. Li-Han at the North Park Harbor Market. I called the store and asked for your number. The woman who answered told me to go to hell, which I respect, but then I explained I was a doctor who'd seen you get hurt, and she gave it to me. A pause. I think she also threatened to find me if I turned out to be lying. That's Rosa. She seems like someone you want on your side. Another pause, longer. How's your hand? Fine. I bandaged it. Li-Han, I've been thinking about what happened for 4 days. I haven't slept well. I keep smelling something that isn't there. Black currant and cold stone. And it's coming from my own clothes even though I've washed them twice. That's not normal. I've been practicing medicine for 7 years, and I have never experienced a pheromone reaction that persists in fabric after a single brief exposure. Why are you telling me this? Because I think you're experiencing something medical, not just emotional. The way your scent appeared and disappeared, the speed of the onset and the abruptness of the cutoff, that's consistent with olfactory pheromone shutdown. I've seen it in patients, trauma-induced dormancy, and the fact that my scent triggered a reactivation, even briefly, suggests a compatibility profile that's extremely rare. His voice had shifted into something precise and careful, the voice of a man used to delivering complex information under pressure. I'm not hitting on you. I'm telling you that what happened in that store has a biological explanation, and if you're willing, I'd like to help you understand it. Li-Han pressed his free hand against his stomach, a reflex he still hadn't broken. I lost a pregnancy, he said, 18 months ago. My scent died the same night. I haven't been able to smell anything since. Heat cycle's gone. Everything gone. Silence on the line. And then, you walked into my store and I could suddenly smell everything. Your scent, the store, the floor cleaner, my own blood. All of it. For about a minute. Then it went dead again. His voice was flat, the way voices go when they're holding too much underneath. So, when you say rare compatibility profile, what I hear is that my broken body latched onto the first signal strong enough to wake it up, and that signal happened to be you, which isn't your problem. It could be, though. Neil's voice had lost the clinical edge. Rawer now. If you'll let it. Li-Han hung up, stared at the phone, pressed his neck gland. Nothing. Called back. Tuesday, he said. I'm off at 4. There's a coffee shop on Adams Avenue near the park. Lestat's Coffee. If you come in scrubs, I'll know you're real. I'll be there. He showed up in scrubs. The pale blue ones from the store, wrinkled from a shift with his hospital ID still clipped to the pocket. Li-Han was already sitting at the window table with an iced Americano he couldn't taste, and when Neil walked through the door, the dead air inside Li-Han's head crackled. The scent didn't come back full force. It was quieter than the grocery store, more like a flicker. Static resolving into signal. The burnt sugar reached him first, then the iron, then that green walnut husk bitterness. And beneath it all, the smell of the coffee shop surfaced, dim but real. Roasted beans, butter from the pastry case, the particular staleness of the couch cushions. Li-Han gripped his cup. His knuckles went white. Neil sat across from him and ordered a drip coffee without looking at the menu. His eyes stayed on Li-Han, dark, focused, the gaze of someone used to monitoring vital signs, reading the body's small betrayals. You can feel it, Neil said, not a question. A little, like hearing a radio through a wall. Is it uncomfortable? It's terrifying. Li-Han met his eyes. Everything has been quiet for 18 months. The quiet became normal. And now you sit down and the volume starts coming back, and I don't know if I want it to. Fair. Neil turned his coffee cup in his hands. They were careful hands, long-fingered, the nails trimmed short and clean. The hands of someone who worked in millimeters. Can I tell you what I think is happening? Medically, not romantically. Go ahead. Pheromone shutdown after pregnancy loss is well documented. The system doesn't break. It goes dormant, like a circuit breaker tripping after a surge. The hardware is intact, but the switch is off. He leaned forward. In severe cases, the shutdown cascades into the general olfactory system. The pheromone receptors and the regular scent receptors share neural pathways, so when the brain pulls the emergency brake on one, it can take both down. That's why you can't smell anything, not just pheromones. Reactivation usually requires a significant hormonal trigger. A new pregnancy, a forming bond, extreme physical stress. But there's a rarer mechanism called resonance compatibility. Two people whose pheromone profiles amplify each other on a molecular level. The compatible scent can act as an external trigger, essentially flipping the breaker back on. And you think that's us? I think my scent woke up something in your body that's been asleep for a year and a half, and I think if we spent more time in proximity, the effect would increase. You're proposing we hang out so my nose works again. The corner of Neil's mouth moved. I'm proposing that you let me buy you coffee once or twice a week and we see what happens. If nothing changes, we stop. If your senses start coming back, we figure out the next step together. Why do you care? The question landed hard. Neil was quiet for several seconds. Because I walked into a grocery store on Wednesday night to buy pasta sauce and crackers because I'd been in surgery for 11 hours and hadn't eaten since 6 in the morning. And your scent hit me from across the building, and I forgot what my hands were for. He looked down at his coffee. I'm 32 years old. I've spent 7 years in operating rooms managing other people's pain. I'm good at being calm. I'm good at being controlled. And in aisle 4 of a North Park grocery store, I lost both in under a second. That hasn't happened to me before. I want to understand why. Lee Han studied him. The fatigue lines around his eyes, the slight tension in his shoulders, the scrub top with a small stain near the hem that looked like iodine. This was a man who had come to a coffee shop in North Park straight from cutting people open because a grocery store Omega's scent had kept him awake for 4 nights. Tuesdays and Fridays, Lee Han said. Here, after my shift. If it doesn't work, you stop coming and we pretend this never happened. Deal. And don't bring me anything. No flowers, no gifts, no grand gestures. I'm not a patient and I'm not a project. Understood. One more thing. Lee Han pushed his iced Americano aside. I need you to know that I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm not looking for an alpha. I'm not looking for anything except getting through each day without the weight of what I lost crushing me flat. If your scent helps my body restart, that's biology. Don't confuse it for something else. Neil held his gaze. I'm not confused about anything, Lee Han, but I appreciate you being clear. They sat for another 40 minutes. Lee Han talked about the store, about Manager Reeves's temper and Rosa's loyalty, and the regular customers who came every evening. Neil talked about the hospital, about the particular loneliness of a job where your patients are always unconscious, where you're the last voice they hear before going under, and you never know if they remember. The conversation moved without force, and by the time Lee Han left, the faint scent of coffee still lingered in his nose. Not strong, but present. He rode the bus home and touched the side of his neck. A whisper. Black current. Barely there. But real. The first Tuesday, Lee Han's senses stayed mostly flat. They sat in the coffee shop for an hour, talked about surface things. The smell of Neil's scent reached him like a signal through fog. Faint and inconsistent. And when Neil left, the fog closed back in. The first Friday, Lee Han could taste his coffee. Bitter, acidic, slightly burnt. He stared at the cup like it had insulted him, and Neil watched him from across the table with an expression he was trying very hard to keep neutral. It tastes terrible, Lee Han said. I've been drinking this for 18 months and it tastes like battery acid. That means your gustatory system is coming back online. Taste and scent are linked. I know they're linked. I'm not an idiot. I didn't say you were. You have a doctor voice. You slip into it when you're explaining things. It makes me feel like a chart you're reading. Neil blinked, then he laughed, short and surprised, and the sound changed his whole face. Younger, less guarded. I'll work on that. By the 3rd week, the pattern was undeniable. Lee Han's senses were returning in layers. First taste, then ambient sense, then the ability to detect his own body. Each session with Neil pushed the recovery further, and the effects lasted longer between meetings. He could smell the store again. The produce section, the dairy cooler, the particular staleness of the break room. He could smell the street on his walk home, the night-blooming jasmine from someone's yard, the salt off the bay. His body was waking up in increments, and each increment made the previous 18 months of silence feel more like a prison he hadn't realized he was in. He told none of this to Neil with warmth. He reported it clinically, almost coldly, because giving this process emotion felt dangerous. If he let himself feel grateful, he'd start depending on Neil's presence. And depending on someone's presence was just a polite way of handing them the switch to your nervous system. Neil took it. He showed up in scrubs, sometimes in street clothes if it was his day off, and he sat across the table and he listened, and he didn't push. "You're angry at me," Neil said on the fourth Friday, not accusing, observational. "I'm not angry at you. You're angry at the situation, but I'm the face of the situation, so I get the sharp edges." Lee Han looked at his hands. The scar from the broken olive oil bottle was a thin white line across his palm. "Yeah, that's accurate. I can take it. You shouldn't have to. I've been in operating rooms where patients' hearts stop on the table. I can handle a grocery store omega with a bad attitude." The word grocery store omega should have stung. Instead, Lee Han laughed. It came out rusty, unused, like a door hinge that hadn't been oiled in a year. Neil stared at him, and his scent shifted. The burnt sugar warming, the iron softening, something almost sweet surfacing underneath. "There it is," Neil said quietly. "That's the first time I've seen you laugh. Don't make it weird." Too late. The weeks turned. 5, 6, 7. Coffee became dinner at the taco shop on 30th Street that stayed open late. Dinner became walks along the Harbor Drive waterfront where the city lights reflected in the San Diego Bay like scattered coins. Lee Han's scent recovery accelerated. By week 6, he was holding at roughly 60% of baseline even between their meetings. He could function as a scented person again. Customers at the store who had looked through him for months suddenly noticed him, their nostrils twitching, their eyes finding his face with the vague recognition of someone who had just become visible. The first time an alpha customer scented Lee Han at the register and leaned forward with interest, Lee Han felt his gland pulse in warning and his scent spike, and the alpha backed off immediately. The whole interaction lasted 3 seconds. Lee Han went to the break room and sat with his back against the wall and breathed through the adrenaline. He was real again. Detectable, present in the biological economy of the world, and it was Neil's fault. In the 7th week, walking along the waterfront after tacos, Neil asked about the baby. "You don't have to answer." "I know I don't." Lee Han watched the bay. A dinner cruise moved along the waterfront, lit up like a birthday cake. I was 22 weeks, a boy. Placental abruption. Random. Nothing I did wrong. He paused. You spend 18 months going over every decision anyway. Every meal, every heavy box I lifted at work, every shift where I stayed on my feet too long. You build a prosecution against yourself even when the evidence says otherwise. That's normal grief processing. Don't use the doctor voice. Sorry. Neil shoved his hands in his coat pockets. I mean, that sounds brutal and unfair, and I'm sorry it happened to you. The father left when I told him, transferred money like a settlement and disappeared. Losing him didn't break me. I was angry, but I could have raised a kid alone. What broke me was losing the kid and then losing myself, because that's what the shutdown was. The person I'd been just went dark. You're not dark now, because of you. Which is its own kind of problem. Why? Lee Han turned to face him. The river light caught Neil's features, the clean line of his jaw, the hollow under his cheekbones, his eyes holding Lee Han's without flinching. He smelled like burnt sugar and iron, and standing close to him was like standing next to a furnace in a room that had been cold for too long. Because what if you stop coming? If this is just resonance compatibility and the novelty fades and you go back to your 11-hour surgeries and forget the omega from the grocery store, does my scent die again? Do I go back to the nothing? I'm not going to stop coming. You can't know that. No. But I can know that I rearranged my surgery schedule 3 times this month so I wouldn't miss a Tuesday or Friday, and I can know that the last time I skipped dinner for a patient was 6 years ago, and the last time I skipped dinner for a person was never until you. He pulled one hand from his pocket and held it between them, palm up, not reaching for Lihan, just open. I'm not built for promises. In my job, you learn not to make them because bodies don't care about your plans. But I can tell you what I'm doing, which is choosing to be here. Repeatedly. On purpose. Lihan looked at his hand. The clean, careful hand that administered drugs and measured dosages and kept people alive while they slept. He looked at it for a long time. Then he reached out and took it. The contact sent a jolt through him that started at his palm and ended at his gland. His scent surged, black current and cold stone erupting so suddenly that Neil inhaled sharply, his grip tightening, his pupils flooding black. There, Neil said. His voice had gone rough, the clinical precision stripped away. Right there, that's you. They stood on the Harbor Drive waterfront, hands locked, their scents colliding in the October air. Where the two profiles met, something new formed. Neither burnt sugar nor black currant, something else entirely, like the smell of the first warm rain on sun-baked concrete, clean and startling and impossible to name. Lihan pulled his hand back first. His heart was slamming. Don't read into that. I'm reading into it. Neil, you took my hand. You didn't have to. Biology didn't make you. That was a choice. Lihan shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and started walking. Neil fell into step beside him, and they walked in silence for 2 blocks. Then Lihan said, without looking at him, "Same time Tuesday." "I'll be there." That night, in his studio apartment in North Park, Lihan pressed his fingers to his neck and his scent was still there. Hours later, after a shower, after lying in bed staring at the water stains on the ceiling, still there. Faint, stubborn, refusing to leave. His phone buzzed. "Your scent is still on my coat. I can smell it from across my apartment." Lihan typed back, "Stop smelling your coat." 3 dots. Then, no. He put the phone on the floor beside his bed, and he did not smile, but his mouth twitched, and the movement felt unfamiliar, like using muscles that had gone stiff from disuse. Week 8 changed the equation. Lihan was working the evening shift, restocking the refrigerated section, when the first preheat flush hit him. Not a full cycle, just a slow wave of warmth that started at his glands and spread outward, and he recognized it from a body he used to inhabit, the body that had cycles and scent and biological purpose. He stood in front of the open cooler and let the cold air wash over his face and tried to think clearly. 18 months without a heat. The doctors had said it might come back, might not. And now his hormones were stirring because his pheromone system was coming back online. And the system was coming back online because of a man who smelled like burnt sugar and kept showing up in scrubs. He called his doctor the next morning. Dr. Okafor, a specialist in omega reproductive health who had treated him since the miscarriage, listened without interrupting. "Your levels are consistent with preheat onset," she said. "Given the duration of your shutdown, the first cycle will be intense. I'd recommend starting a moderate suppressant now, but you should know the pressure may exceed what medication can contain. We should discuss contingency plans." "What kind of contingency plans?" "Someone you trust, to be present, not to act on anything, but to provide pheromone support through the worst of it." "And if I don't have someone?" "Then we admit you to the Omega Care ward for the duration. It's safe, but uncomfortable." Lihan hung up and stared at the suppressant prescription on his phone screen, and thought about Neil's hands and Neil's scent, and his voice saying, "I'm choosing to be here," repeatedly, on purpose. He filled the prescription at the CVS on University Avenue, put the box in his bathroom cabinet, went to work. tagged prices, restocked shelves, mopped floors. And when Neil showed up at Lestat's Coffee on Friday in street clothes, dark jeans and a gray sweater, smelling like he'd showered recently, Lee-Han told him about the preheat. Neil listened with his coffee untouched. How far out? Weeks, maybe. The suppressants should hold it. And if they don't? Then I go to the Omega ward. Or I could be there. You're not my alpha, Neil. I know that, but I'm the person whose scent your body responds to. If the alternative is a hospital ward with fluorescent lights and rotating beta attendants, I'm telling you there's a better option. The better option being you, in my apartment, during a heat, with whatever boundaries you set, written down if you want. I'll sign them. Lee-Han laughed. It was short and sharp and not entirely kind. You'd sign a contract for my heat? I'd sign whatever you need to feel safe. The bluntness of it took the edge off Lee-Han's defenses. He sat with it, turning his Americano in his hands, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I'm falling for you. I didn't want to, and I tried not to, and it's happening anyway. And I'm telling you now because if you're going to be in my apartment during the most vulnerable moment of my life, you need to know that my feelings are compromised. I can't promise that what I say during a heat is what I'd say with a clear head. Neil set his coffee down. His jaw worked. He looked like a man trying to fit too many words through a narrow opening. I've been in love with you since week 3, he said. When you told me my doctor voice made you feel like a chart. Nobody talks to me like that. Nobody talks to me at all, actually. Not about anything real. My patients are unconscious. My colleagues discuss dosages. My family asks when I'm going to settle down and I change the subject. And then, you sat across from me in a coffee shop and told me my personality was a flaw, and I thought, oh, so this is what it's like when someone actually sees you. That's a terrible reason to fall in love with someone. It's the only honest one I've got. They looked at each other across the table. The coffee shop was closing around them, the barista wiping down the counter, the lights dimming. Outside, the streetlights along Adams Avenue cast long amber lines across the wet pavement. Come to my shift tomorrow, Lee-Han said, at the store. Buy your pasta sauce and crackers like a normal person. Stay until close. Walk me home. Is that a date? It's whatever it needs to be. Neil came to the store. He bought pasta sauce and crackers. He lingered in the aisles, pretending to read nutrition labels, while Lee-Han worked the register and the floor and tried not to look at him more than twice a minute. Rosa figured it out in under 10 seconds. That's the doctor, she said, materializing at Lee-Han's elbow, the one from the alley. He's shopping. He's been reading the same bag of black beans for 7 minutes. Maybe he really likes black beans. Lee-Han, Rosa's voice dropped. Your scent is doing something. I'm a beta and I can smell you from the break room. Whatever is happening, it's happening now. Lee-Han looked down at his own arms. Goosebumps. His gland was warm and swollen under his apron collar. She was right. His scent was broadcasting, not the faint whisper of the past weeks, but something fuller, richer, the black current deepening. A warmth underneath he hadn't felt since the pregnancy. He looked across the store at Neil, who was still holding the bag of black beans but had stopped pretending to read it. He was looking at Lee-Han with an expression that was barely controlled. His nostrils flared. His hand on the bag was white-knuckled. Lee-Han finished his shift. Neil waited by the vending machines in the alley. They walked to North Park in silence, their breath fogging in the November cold, their scents mingling in the narrow space between them. At the door to his building, Lee-Han stopped. I need to say something before this goes further. Okay. The last person who was supposed to stay sent me $300 and disappeared. And before him, nobody was supposed to stay in the first place, because nobody noticed I existed long enough to try. So the idea of needing someone, of my body needing someone, is the scariest thing I can think of. Scarier than the shutdown, scarier than the grief, because at least when I was numb, nobody could leave. Neil stood very still. His scent had gone quiet, pulled close, as though even his biology was giving Lee Han space. "I'm not asking you to need me," Neil said. "I'm asking you to let me be here while you figure out what you need for yourself." Lee Han studied his face in the streetlight. The clean jaw. The surgical mask indent still faintly visible across his nose even now, hours after his shift. The eyes that never wavered. He leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief. Closed-mouthed. More question than statement, but when they separated, Lee Han's scent exploded so violently that a passing couple on the sidewalk turned and stared. Black currant and cold river stone, and underneath, warm as bread, the toasted sesame note that Lee Han had not smelled on his own skin in 18 months. "Inside," Lee Han said. His voice was rough. "Come inside." They climbed the narrow stairs to the studio apartment. It was small, cluttered, the walls bare except for a Fresno Greyhound schedule Lee Han had never taken down. Neil filled the space. Not physically, though he was tall enough that the low ceiling made him duck at the doorframe. His scent filled it. Burnt sugar and iron saturating the air. Lee Han breathed, mixing with the black current until the tiny room smelled like the two of them and no one else. They kissed again. Longer this time. Neil's hands cupped Lee Han's face, careful, precise, the touch of a man who measured his actions for a living. Lee Han's hands gripped the front of Neil's sweater and pulled him closer, and the wanting was so sharp and sudden it almost hurt, because his body hadn't wanted anything in 18 months, and now it wanted everything at once. Neil pulled back. His breathing was ragged. "We should stop." "Why?" "Because your preheat markers are through the roof right now, and my self-control has a shelf life." "Good." Lee Han. His hands were still on Lee Han's face, thumbs resting along his cheekbones. "I need you to want this on a morning when you're stocking shelves and your scent is quiet and biology isn't doing the talking. On a day like any other day. That's when I need you to want it." Lee Han looked at him. And some part of him, the part that had spent 18 months alone and numb and invisible, wanted to argue. Wanted to pull Neil back in and prove that this was real, that it wasn't just chemistry, that he could choose and be chosen even when his body was screaming. But another part of him, the part that stocked shelves and mopped floors and rode the bus home in the dark and kept going, recognized what Neil was doing. He was treating Lee Han like a person who deserved to choose clearly. And that mattered more than the scent or the coffee or the careful hands. "Tuesday," Lee Han said. 4 o'clock. Lestat's coffee. "I'll say it then." "Say what?" "Whatever I'm going to say, with a clear head." Neil pressed his forehead against Lee Han's. Their scents hung in the small room, tangled, refusing to separate. "Tuesday," he said. He left. Lee Han locked the door and stood in his studio and breathed the air that still smelled like both of them, and put his hand over his heart and felt it beating too fast and too hard and entirely alive. On Tuesday, at Lestat's coffee, at 4 in the afternoon, with his apron still folded in his bag, and his scent quiet, and his hands wrapped around an Americano he could actually taste, Lee Han told Neil he was in love with him. "This isn't about the resonance. It isn't about my body needing yours. It's because you show up in scrubs and buy black beans you don't need, and you told me the loneliest thing I've ever heard anyone say about your patients being unconscious and nobody talking to you about anything real. And I thought, I talked to him about real things. I'm the person who does that, and I want to keep being that person." Neil's hand found his across the table. "Then keep being that person. I plan to." They were together after that. Neil started coming to the store on his days off, buying things he didn't need. Lee Han let himself be walked home after closing. Let Neil's scent linger in his studio, on his pillow, in the fabric of his jacket. On the nights Neil stayed late, they discovered each other in pieces. Neil, it turned out, ran 6 miles before every shift because the repetition quieted his brain. He had a younger sister in Sacramento who called him every Sunday and spent the first 10 minutes complaining about her alpha boyfriend before asking Neil why he was still single. He read nonfiction almost exclusively. Dense books about anesthesiology history and the philosophy of consciousness. And the one time Li-Han caught him reading a thriller, Neil had hidden it behind a medical journal, like a teenager caught with contraband. He cooked terribly and refused to admit it. He folded his scrubs before putting them in the laundry, which Li-Han found absurd, and then, gradually, endearing. And he was careful, meticulous. The same precision he brought to dosages and intubation, he brought to Li-Han. He noticed when Li-Han's shoulders climbed toward his ears during a long shift. He noticed the particular silence that meant Li-Han was thinking about the baby, and he didn't try to fill it. He just moved closer, let his scent do what words couldn't. 3 weeks into being official, they were on Li-Han's bed, and Neil asked if he could scent him. Properly, Neil said, wrist to gland, the kind that stays. Li-Han's mouth went dry. Scenting between unbonded people was intimate in a way that kissing wasn't. A kiss was mouths. Scenting was biology. It was pressing the most vulnerable part of your body against someone else's and letting your pheromones speak a language that couldn't lie. Yes, Li-Han said. Neil took Li-Han's wrist and turned it over, exposing the thin skin where the veins ran blue and the secondary gland sat just below the surface. He brought it to his own neck, to the gland behind his jaw, and pressed Li-Han's wrist against it. The contact was a match strike. Li-Han's entire arm went hot and his scent surged, black current flooding the room so fast that Neil's breath stuttered. God, Neil said. His voice had dropped low, rough in a way Li-Han hadn't heard before. You have no idea what you smell like. Tell me. Like the thing my lizard brain has been scanning every room for since I presented. And I never found it. Not once. Until you were standing in aisle 4 with flour on your shoes. He turned Li-Han's wrist and pressed his mouth to the gland there, not a kiss, but something closer to reverence. His lips parted against the skin, breathing Li-Han in. Li-Han's back arched off the mattress. The sensation traveled from his wrist to his neck to the base of his spine, and his omega instincts, dormant for so long, roared awake and demanded more. Neil moved to Li-Han's neck, pressed his own wrist gland against the mark site, and the pheromone exchange hit them both like a drug. Li-Han's hands fisted in the sheets. Neil's breath came ragged against his throat. Their scents tangled, and where they met, that combined note formed again. Warm rain and hot pavement, and the room smelled like both of them and the future they hadn't built yet. More, Li-Han said. If I do more, I'm going to lose the ability to stop. I know. Li-Han. Neil pulled back just enough to look at him. His pupils were blown, barely a ring of iris left. His scent was pouring off him, alpha pheromones thick enough to taste, but his hands on Li-Han's waist were still controlled, still precise. I want to badly enough that it physically hurts, but your heat is coming, and if we cross this line now, my body is going to imprint on yours, and the heat will be 10 times harder to manage with restraint. Li-Han stared up at him. Flushed, panting, his glands swollen and broadcasting want in every direction. I hate that you're right. I hate that I'm right too. After the heat, and Neil pressed his forehead to Li-Han's. I'm going to take a very long, very cold shower now. Good luck with that. I don't need luck. I need a different apartment that doesn't smell like you. He left. Li-Han lay on his bed with his scent blazing and his heart hammering, and the ghost of Neil's wrist still burning against his neck. His body was screaming. His biology was furious, but underneath the frustration, something else. Trust. The bone-deep certainty that Neil would never take more than Lee Han was ready to give. Rosa cornered him in the break room on a Thursday. "You're different," she said, arms crossed. "I'm the same." "You're humming. You hummed through the entire dairy restock. You haven't hummed since before." She let the word hang. They both knew what before meant. "It's the doctor, isn't it?" "Rosa, I'm happy for you. I'm also going to kill him if he hurts you, and that's not a metaphor. I know where the store keeps the box cutters." Noted. The conversation had happened on the waterfront a week earlier, walking home from tacos. Lee Han had laid it out the way he handled everything, directly and without softening. "The heat is coming. Dr. Okafor says 2 to 3 weeks. It's going to be bad because of how long I've been in shutdown. I need someone with me, I'm asking you." Neil had been quiet for several steps. "What are the boundaries?" "You stay. You keep me hydrated. You provide scent support. You do not bond me, even if I beg. Especially if I beg. Even if you beg. During a heat, my judgment is gone. I need you to hold the line I'm drawing right now, when I can think clearly. I can do that. Even if it's hard." "Lee Han." Neil stopped walking and turned to face him. His scent was pulled tight, controlled, the way it got when he was feeling something too large for the space he'd built around it. "I put people to sleep for a living. I manage their pain while they can't manage it themselves. I hold the line between conscious and unconscious every single day. I can hold this one. Okay. Okay." They'd walked the rest of the way in silence, and Lee Han had gone to sleep that night with the window open and the November air cold on his face and the certainty that he had chosen the right person for the hardest thing his body was about to do. 8 days before the projected heat on a Monday, Lee Han's phone rang during his lunch break in the Harbor Market stockroom. The number was familiar, stored under a name he hadn't opened in over a year. Garrett. He stared at the screen for 4 rings, then answered. "Lee Han." Garrett's voice was the same. Easy, unbothered, the voice of a man whose life had never been derailed by anything because he'd never stayed long enough for the derailing to reach him. "Don't hang up." "Why would I hang up? This is the most interesting thing that's happened in my stockroom all week." A pause. Garrett had never known what to do with Lee Han's mouth. That had been part of the problem. "I'm in San Diego. I transferred back from Phoenix last month. I wanted to see you." "No. 5 minutes. I owe you a conversation. You owed me a conversation 19 months ago. You gave me $300 instead. Xia, debt settled." "Lee Han, I heard about what happened. Xia, the miscarriage." Xia, the stockroom went cold. Lee Han's grip on his phone tightened until the case creaked. "Who told you? Does it matter? It matters to me who's been talking about the worst thing that ever happened to me behind my back. I've been in therapy. Part of the process is making amends to people I've hurt. I wanted to apologize, in person, properly." Every nerve in Lee Han's body said no, but underneath the no was something older, a knot of rage that had been sitting in his chest for 19 months, calcified and familiar, and he was suddenly exhausted by the weight of it. "Tomorrow. Noon. Lestat's coffee. Public. 30 minutes. Thank you." He hung up and went back to stocking ramen packets and told himself it would be fine. It was not fine. Garrett looked exactly the same, which made Lee Han furious. Clean-cut, well-dressed, easy confidence. He was wearing scent blockers, the clinical kind that flattened his alpha pheromones to nothing. "You're blocking," Lee Han said as Garrett sat down. "My therapist recommended it." "Your therapist has good instincts." The apology was textbook, specific, accountable, free of excuses. Garrett acknowledged that leaving during the pregnancy was cowardly, that the money had been dehumanizing, that he'd caused real harm and he was sorry. Lihan listened and felt nothing. The anger didn't dissolve. It just sat there, and he understood with sudden clarity that it had never been about Garrett. It was about the loss, the baby, the 18 months of nothing. No apology could reach it. "Thank you," Lihan said. "I can see you've done the work, but it doesn't change anything for me." Garrett nodded. He stood, and then he said the thing that detonated everything. "There's something else. The reason I transferred back to San Diego." He paused. "My partner is pregnant. He's an Omega. We're due in the spring." The cafe tilted. Lihan's hands went flat on the table. He felt his glands constrict, a sharp, sick pain shooting down both sides of his neck. "Congratulations," he said. His voice belonged to someone else. "I wasn't sure whether to tell you," my therapist said. "Your therapist needs to mind his business. Leave." Garrett left, and Lihan sat alone in the cafe where he'd fallen in love with Neil and felt his scent draining out of him like blood from a wound, the black current retreating, the cold stone going silent, not as sudden as 18 months ago. Slower, a candle guttering in a draft. By the time he walked back to the store for his afternoon shift, his scent was gone. He didn't call Neil. He worked his shift, tagged prices, restocked shelves, smiled at customers who no longer noticed him because there was nothing to notice. He clocked out, rode the bus, climbed the stairs to his studio, and lay on his bed in the dark. The numbness was back. That gray blank where the world had been. Garrett had a baby coming. Garrett, who had sent $300 and walked away from a pregnancy like canceling a subscription, was about to get the family Lihan had bled for and lost. Neil called 3 times. Lihan didn't answer. A text came at midnight. "I can feel that something is wrong. I don't know how. I've been restless since this afternoon. Please tell me you're okay." Lihan typed, "Fine. Need a few days. I'm here. Whenever you're ready." He wasn't ready for 3 days. He called in sick. Rosa brought soup to his door, which he didn't eat. He lay on his bed and checked his neck compulsively, every hour, every half hour. Nothing. On the 3rd day, Rosa came back. She didn't bring soup this time. She sat on the floor of his studio and waited until he told her. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your scent started coming back before you ever met Neil." "What?" "Think about it. You've been working in that store for 18 months. You've been around thousands of people, hundreds of alphas, and one random Wednesday your body decides to start waking up." Neil's scent was the match, sure, but matches only work on kindling that's already dry. That's not. Let me finish. After the miscarriage, you could have quit. You could have gone back to Fresno, you could have stopped, but you didn't. You kept showing up, you worked your shifts and rode the bus and ate your meals and kept going even when you couldn't taste the food. That's not nothing, Lihan. That's someone choosing to stay alive even when alive doesn't feel like anything. Your body was watching you do that, and when it was ready, it found the signal it needed. Lihan stared at the ceiling. Your scent didn't crash because Garrett has a new baby. It crashed because the news hit the same wound and your system panicked. But you're not the same person you were 18 months ago. You've been healing. On your own. In the dark. And Neil sped it up. But he didn't start it. When did you get wise? I've been stocking shelves next to you for 2 years. You learned things. She stood up. Call the doctor, not the boyfriend, the doctor. Lihan called Neil. He answered before the first ring finished. Lihan. My ex came to see me. He's having a baby with someone else. My scent crashed. Silence. Then, I'm coming. I don't have anything to offer you right now. The scent is gone. The progress is gone. Just the mess. I'm coming anyway. He was there in 20 minutes. He came through the door smelling like burnt sugar and scrubs and cold night air, and he didn't say anything. He crossed the room and sat on the bed beside Li-Han and pulled him against his chest and held him. "I can smell you," Li-Han said into Neil's neck. "Even now, even when everything else is dead, you're the only thing that gets through. Then let that be enough for tonight." They sat in the dark. Li-Han's gland ached, deep and sore, and underneath the ache, the faintest flicker. Barely there. A pilot light, stubborn and small. "I thought it was all you," Li-Han said, "my scent coming back. I thought you were the source, and without you I was just empty again. And when the news about Garrett hit, it confirmed it. Dependent, borrowed, not mine. And now? Now I think Rosa is right. I've been rebuilding myself for 18 months in the ugliest, most boring way possible. Shift by shift, bus ride by bus ride. I built the foundation. You gave my body the last piece it needed, but the house was already going up. That's the smartest thing you've ever said. Don't push it." Neil's arms tightened. Against Li-Han's neck, his scent was warm and close, and Li-Han felt the flicker brighten. Less because Neil was here, and more because Li-Han was choosing to let it. Black currant, cold stone, the faintest thread of sesame. His, not borrowed. His. The heat came 5 days later. Li-Han woke at 3 in the morning with his sheet soaked and his gland swollen and the scent of black currant so thick in his studio it was like breathing syrup. Every nerve was live. The hum of the refrigerator was deafening. His own pulse was a drum in his skull. He called Neil. "It's starting." "How bad?" "Bad. 15 minutes. Unlock your door." Li-Han staggered across his studio and turned the lock and made it back to his bed before his legs gave out. Neil was there in 12 minutes. The burnt sugar hit the room like a wall, and the relief was so immediate, Li-Han's whole body shuddered. Neil appeared in the doorway. Scrubs, coat half on, bag in hand. His pupils were blown. His nostrils flared. His jaw was locked with the effort of standing still, while Li-Han's heat pheromones hit him point blank. "Tell me what you need." "Close. Your scent. Water." Neil crossed the room and sat on the bed. Li-Han pressed himself against his side, face buried in Neil's neck, breathing in frantic pulls of burnt sugar and iron. The pheromone exchange was immediate, Neil's alpha scent wrapping around the heat like a compress on a burn, not extinguishing it, but blunting the worst of the pain. The waves came in surges. Li-Han rode them with his face pressed into Neil's neck and Neil's hands running cool cloths over his forehead and water held to his lips when he could manage it. At the peak around noon, his lucidity cracked. "Bond me," he gasped, fingers fisted in Neil's scrub top. "Please, it'll make it stop." "No. Neil, you told me to hold the line. I'm holding it. I hate you. You said that would happen too." His voice was stripped raw, the effort of resisting audible in every syllable. "I'm still here." The wave crested. Li-Han's body convulsed against Neil's, and a sound came out of him that was closer to a scream than anything else, and Neil held him through it with his scent blazing, and his hands shaking, and his jaw so tight the muscle jumped. By evening, the fever broke. Li-Han lay in wrecked sheets, trembling, hollowed out, his body quiet for the first time in 12 hours. His scent was settling around him. Full, complete. Black currant and cold riverstone and toasted sesame. The entire profile restored, richer than it had been before the loss. The heat had completed the reboot. "You stayed," Li-Han said. His voice was sand. "I stayed. You said no when I couldn't say it for myself. Was I wrong?" Li-Han was quiet for a long time. His scent filled the small room, warm and whole and entirely his own. "No, you were right." Neil exhaled. Something he'd been holding for hours released in that breath. Li-Han reached for his hand. laced their fingers together. And they lay in the cramped studio apartment with the San Diego skyline visible through the window and their scents mixing in the dark, and the quiet between them held. "I want to bond you," Li-Han said, "when I'm clear-headed. When there's no heat clouding my judgment and no pheromone science to explain it away. I want to bond you because you bought black beans for 7 minutes and walked me home in the cold and held the line when everything in both of us was screaming to break it. When? When I can stand in front of you with a clear head and a working nose and choose you on purpose. Take your time." "I will." 3 weeks later, on the first Wednesday of December, Li-Han asked Neil to come to the store, not during closing, during his shift. Aisle 4, where it started. Li-Han was working the floor, green apron on, name tag crooked as always, pricing gun in one hand. He watched Neil walk through the glass doors and pick up a basket and move through the store with the careful, familiar purposelessness of a man who had spent weeks pretending to shop in this exact building. Neil stopped in aisle 4, right where the canned tomatoes met the cooking oils, the exact spot where a bag of flour had split and a bottle of olive oil had broken and Li-Han's dead world had torn open. Li-Han set down the pricing gun, took off his apron, walked down the aisle. Neil was holding a bag of crackers. He lowered it when he saw Li-Han's face. "This is where it started," Li-Han said. "You walked into my store and my body came back to life. But I'm the one who kept it alive. Through the shutdown and the grief and the nothing and the 3 days after Garrett, I kept going, and I get to choose what I do with what I built." He reached up and placed his hand on the side of Neil's neck, fingertips against the alpha's gland. Neil's breath stopped. "I choose you," Li-Han said, "right here, middle of my shift, wearing my ugly apron, clear head, working nose, no heat pushing me. I choose you because you're the best person I know, and I want your bite on my neck and mine on yours, and I want it here because this is where I came back." Neil's hand came up and covered Li-Han's, pressing it harder against his gland. Both their scents surged, black currant and burnt sugar, riverstone and cold iron, toasted sesame and walnut husk, merging into that impossible combined scent, like the first warm rain on hot pavement, clean and startling and new. "In a grocery store," Neil said. His voice was wrecked. "You want to bond in a grocery store?" "My grocery store, yes." "Li-Han, say yes." "Yes." Li-Han tilted his head, offered his gland, and Neil leaned in and bit, clean and sharp, and the bond locked into place like a circuit completing. Warmth flooded from the mark through Li-Han's chest, into his blood, into the center of him. Neil's emotions rushed in, tangled and enormous. The relief alone nearly took Li-Han's knees out. Li-Han pulled Neil down to his own neck. Bit. The bond completed. Two-way. Permanent. They stood in aisle 4 of the North Park Harbor Market, bonded and scent-marked and crying. And Manager Reeves rounded the corner, took one look, said, "Not on the clock," and walked away. Rosa appeared 2 seconds later, already filming on her phone. "I'm sending this to your mother," she said. "Rosa, don't you dare." Too late. Already sent. Li-Han's phone buzzed in his pocket. His mother in Fresno. He would answer later. Right now, Neil was holding his face and looking at him like he was the most important, vital sign in the room. And Li-Han's scent was blazing, full and complete, and his. And the grocery store smelled like produce and floor wax and two people who had found each other between the cooking oils and the canned goods. 3 months later, Li-Han enrolled in the vet tech program at Mesa College. He hadn't planned the timing. It just happened. He was restocking the dairy cooler on a Tuesday when Rosa slid a community college course catalog across the break room table and said, "You've been staring at that dog in the parking lot for 10 minutes. Go be a vet." And the idea, which had been sitting dormant in the same place his scent used to hide, woke up. Neil drove him to orientation, sat in the car and read a dense book about the history of general anesthesia while Li-Han signed paperwork and picked up a student ID with a photo that made him look startled, which he was. On the drive home, Neil said, "You know I can cover tuition." Li-Han said, "I know, I already applied for financial aid." Neil nodded and didn't push it because he had learned that Li-Han's independence wasn't pride. It was the foundation he'd built himself on, and you don't take a hammer to someone's foundation just because you can afford better materials. He kept his shifts at Harbor Market. Mornings at school, evenings at the store. It was exhausting, and it was his, and for the first time in 2 years the future had a shape again. 2 months into the semester, Li-Han stood in the bathroom of their apartment in North Park and looked at the positive pregnancy test in his hand. His scent was whole, rich with the black currant and cold stone and toasted sesame, now layered with a new warmth he recognized. His body had carried a life before. It knew what this warmth meant. He walked into the kitchen where Neil was attempting to cook scrambled eggs and somehow producing something that smelled burnt and undercooked simultaneously. "How?" Li-Han said from the doorway. "The stove hates me." The stove is an inanimate object. It hates me specifically. Neil looked up. His eyes dropped to the test in Li-Han's hand. The recognition moved across his face. Shock, stillness, then a joy so enormous his scent flooded the apartment, burnt sugar and iron and warmth. He crossed the kitchen and kissed Li-Han. "Are you scared?" Neil asked. Li-Han thought about it. Really thought. The last time he'd held a positive test, he'd been alone in a studio apartment, staring at a plus sign that was about to rearrange his entire life. He'd told Garrett the next day and gotten silence and $300. He'd been terrified then, but the terror had been mixed with the certainty that everything good would be taken from him, because everything good always had been. This was what's different. Neil was here. Neil, who had held the line during a heat and showed up with no cent to offer and signed imaginary contracts and bought black beans for 7 minutes. Neil, who would drive him to every appointment and read pregnancy books with the same intensity he brought to anesthesiology journals and overcook every meal for the next 9 months. "No," Li-Han said. "I'm not scared." Neil's eyes went wet. "Really? I have school. I have you. I have Rosa, who is going to lose her mind when I tell her." He put the test on the counter and took Neil's face in both hands. "The last time I had nothing, and I was still willing to do it alone. This time I have everything, so no, I'm not scared." Neil pulled him closer, one hand resting against Li-Han's stomach. Inside the apartment, 2 men stood in their kitchen with a pregnancy test and a bond mark, and the world smelled like everything. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time.